Um,
Just
yeah,
for the record, I'm like, I don't go by the veganism society of definition
yeah.
myself either. But yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's do this. Let's look at the notes that you've had for
sure.
my definition, and then after that, let's tell me maybe what you think the definition elements of the definition are in your mind that are different from the vegan society and different from mine.
All right, cool. So I'll just read yours here. Veganism is a philosophy that seeks to extend moral consideration to non human animals on the basis of actions unwanted by each animal, such as harm and physical force. So, yeah, my first note on this was the word animal. Um, so there are certain animals where I wouldn't extend this moral philosophy to, like bivalves or other non-sentient animals, and there's certain hypothetical beings that, where I would want to extend this moral consideration, and I would consider veganism to be like I would consider that to be in scope of what you like the spirit of what you're trying to define. It's like if a non-animal alien species, like different DNA, they didn't evolve like whatever. It's like if they were sentient, I would want them to not to also have moral consideration applied to them. So I don't think it's a problem because it doesn't really like it's not a practical problem at least. So as long as you somewhere in this define animal as like
Mm-hmm.
sentient being, I think that it's fine to use animal because that's I think it just resonates better with
Yeah.
most kind of the general public as to what we're
Okay.
actually talking about.
So this is what I want to change it to based on what you just said. So I want to change what I wrote to non-human animal capable of sentience, and I want you to talk me out of that.
Yeah,
And I'll
capable.
explain why I think the capable part
Okay.
real quick. Do
Okay.
you think it's possible for a human to be alive and not sentient? And by not sentient, I guess there might
Coma.
be different definitions. Not even just in a coma, but like so. The definition of sentience would be the ability to perceive or to feel. So let's say somebody was born with some kind of an anomaly where they can't feel, they cannot feel pain at all. Um, the reason we would extend not harming them would be based on that they are of a species that species
Mm,
can, even though they're an anomaly. But the question is, does an anomaly exist whatsoever of something being alive and unable to perceive? Can somebody be so mentally challenged that they're alive enough that we would respect keeping them alive, and they can go through the motions of being fed through just being fed or through an IV or something, where they cannot perceive anything, but we still view them as worth keeping alive?
um, I don't know if that's like if there's an actual condition. Like hypothetically, it's like perceive. Um, what like why not just use the word sentient there?
Well, no, I just looked up the definition of sentience before we were going to talk today, and
Okay.
and the definition just said ability to perceive or feel. It was the definition. Now,
Yeah.
usually when people talk about sentience, they talk about a brain and a central nervous system, but they must be referring to that is what you
Yeah,
need
I
to
mean,
be able to
you
perceive
could
it.
have like a silicon based like a we could build a computer that becomes sentient or something. I would value
Mm,
that being's experience as well.
mm,
So I don't think you need a. I think it's the brain and central nervous system is a sufficient condition of sentience, not a necessary condition.
mm,
Um,
mm,
Maybe it's not even sufficient. Like there's because you could like a dead person has a brain and central nervous system but is not sentient.
mm.
So like I don't know. To me, it's just like if there's if you have a subjective experience, that's what I mean by sentience, and
Okay.
that's like
Well,
if we're getting like yeah, I agree. You could have a being that could not feel anything, but I think that would still I would want moral consideration for that being. But if
okay.
you had a being that didn't have a subjective experience, but you could keep them
Yeah.
alive, I wouldn't
Look,
care about that being.
I'm going to either sound crazy right now or I'm going to change your mind or both. So imagine this hypothetical. You have a natural hot springs of sorts. You just have this hole with some water in it, and for whatever reason, any any animal's offspring at early stages can go through its development to reach sentience in this spring of water, and this practically never happens. But let's just say that in the hypothetical, in real life, it does never happen. But let's just say this wolf is going out in nature. It's going by. It's pregnant. It has a non-sentient zygote wolf inside of
Mm-hmm.
it, and that happens to fall out of it as it's jumping over this spring.
All
And
right.
this it lands in the spring. It's in this water. It's very shallow, and for whatever reason, the magical properties in here just let it treat it as if it's inside of its mother. And so it's not sentient yet, but it's of a species that is capable of sentience. If I saw that, I wouldn't view pulling that zygote or embryo of a wolf out and consuming it. I wouldn't view that the same way I'd view a bivalve that never has a capability of sentience. But I would respect that embryo that is going to become sentient in that hot spring.
I disagree wholeheartedly. And I think you do too,
Um,
actually. So
let's
this
do
is
it.
basically like, yeah. So to me, the reductio of that position is sperm rights, right? Because it's like it's a thing that could become sentient. It's of a species that could become sentient, or sorry, it's
Mhm.
of a species that has sentience. Like my position on that is like I don't value it until the point at which it has reached sentience, and then I value the current and future sentience of that
Mm.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. So it's complicated. I don't think there's an easy answer, but
And I don't think the species thing matters either. Like
Mhm.
I like if there was, I think the reductio there is like if a plant, one plant reached sentience, you'd all of a sudden value all plants. Like
Mhm. Um, well, the species would have to be a species that is the norm for the species. I would say, like for example, when we talk about humans, we don't say some humans have 10 fingers. Humans have 10 fingers, but there are anomalies. So if the anomaly is the one plant being sentient, the daffodils are not sentient because one of all the trillions in the world, one ever was. It would be, I think, I don't know what the cutoff would look like. I don't know exactly how we know that, like when we talk about species of animals, there are males and there are females. You don't let the anomaly of intersex change how you describe something. Um, but
uh, I
maybe.
yeah, we might disagree on that too, actually.
Okay, okay, okay.
Because I think like you're sort of it's almost like an equivocation because you're there's impreciseness to our language, and when we say like humans have 10 fingers, what we actually mean is that like on average like most humans have 10 fingers. That's what we mean by saying that, I think, because
Hmm.
it's like if what we mean is all humans have 10 fingers, that is factually incorrect because not all humans have 10 fingers. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
the equivocation is you're using the word uh, or the category of humans have to
Mhm.
refer to um, like a propensity or a likelihood, but then you're saying that that doesn't jive with like the example that would, I'm explaining this bad, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, no, you're right. Let me try to take a different route and see how you respond to this.
Okay.
So what if the natural order of giving birth to wolves is that a pregnant wolf goes to the hot springs,
Mm-hmm.
they let out their non-sentient wolf pups at whatever stage they're at, and then a month later they show up at the hot springs, and through whatever wild magic, which if you've ever seen how kangaroos are born, this isn't even too far fetched. But if you they go to the hot springs and then those wolf pups like somehow whatever tiny form they are, figure out their way to get back up inside of the uterus of the wolf. And then a month later, the wolf comes back to the hot springs, lets him out. And then this is just the process. This is the natural process that takes place. And we're not referring to wolf eggs or wolf sperm. We're referring to as soon as they became their own individual wolf, but has not reached sentience. Knowing that this is the process of how it gets to be to the stage that is sentient, would you say that it is acceptable to eat?
Yes. Well, like
The,
externalities aside, so like I don't think there's any harm being done to the wolf embryo thing or whatever it is, but I think there's harm being done to the mother wolf who is expecting her wolf pup to be there and come back. So it's like if the mother died and there was no other externalities to consider, I don't think anything's wrong with like killing and eating the non-sentient, has never been sentient wolf pup or whatever.
But you do care about the fact that it wants it to be there, like it wants to come back
Totally.
and okay,
The
interesting.
mother, yeah.
No,
But it's like
I don't
that's
disagree with
an
you, but I think
externality
it's
though, right? Like
complicated.
I don't morally value the embryo. I morally value the mother wolf,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Okay. So and it would probably be similar with what we were talking about with the cow in the forest, that its droppings are there. You want to use the manure, and we can research and study to basically know that it's never going to come back for its manure. But if it wanted to come back for its manure, then it wouldn't be acceptable to use it.
Yeah, I mean, your philosophy, I think that's sort of an irrelevant question because all you're saying is like we should extend moral consideration to, or veganism is extending moral consideration to non-human animals, and by
Yeah.
non-human animals I mean X or whatever. And so it's like,
Hmm.
in my view, you should just say sentient beings, and
Yeah.
that would mean you extend moral consideration to the mother wolf, whatever that means, and you don't extend it to the embryo, whatever
See,
that means.
I personally extend it to the embryo, um, unless the embryo has no chance of life. Like an embryo falling out of a wolf that is just on the ground and nothing's ever going to happen. Sure, it's its own thing. And I guess I shouldn't have a definition be based on a hypothetical that makes no sense about hot springs. But
I said, like, how do you get around the sperm rights reductio? Because like the future sentience, like, is it just because it
the
is
sperm
its
can
own
become.
organism?
Yes, that's where I'm at now. I could probably be convinced otherwise. I love learning about these things. I spent 30 minutes before our talk learning about singamy and the difference between singamy and fertilization.
Right.
The more information we get on these things, the more understanding we'll have of how these things work. In a big sense, I don't really care about a zygote of any form, human or animal, but if the animal has been created its own separate thing, because sperm on its own will be nothing. Sperm shot into the ground is just sperm. Eggs falling out is just eggs. The combination only matter if they are capable, if they're in the right environment to finish off their process. So even if you combine the two, singamy happens, and then if that just was on the ground, it would be nothing. It's going to be dead. It doesn't matter. But knowing that it is complete, it is a first stage of life of a species of animal, and it is it's currently like in motion in its life process. That means something to me. Now I wouldn't go out of my way if I didn't know it was in the hot spring and I went to go sit in this in the water and enjoy stuff. I I'm not going to go out of my way to make sure there's not ants where I'm walking. But I wouldn't actively kill this thing because it hasn't reached sentience if it is a living animal. It's not living and of a species like my skin cells are living, but my skin cells aren't a human. But once singamy happens, I believe whether it's worth protecting or not, you have a human. And so same thing with a wolf. You have a wolf and it is growing. It just hasn't reached what we call sentience yet.
Yeah, I just see no reason to extend moral consideration to those things. Like, I don't know. I guess the reductio that comes to mind would be something like a facility that stores embryos or something, and there's like
Mhm.
millions of embryos there. It's like, are in your mind, are they in a complete category below sentient beings? Like if there was a 5-year-old child or something, or a facility that had millions of embryos, I would save the
Yeah.
5-year-old child over the millions of embryos. Cause like, so are
Yeah.
they in a separate category such that they like, there's no amount of embryos that could ever surpass the value of a sentient
Yeah,
being?
well, part of it comes down to calculations of what we're capable of. Um, I um, so if we had this factory that had what you're describing, but let's say we had a million factory grown humans that reach day one of sentience. So it's like approximately 10 weeks into pregnancy.
Yeah.
Um, that tiny thing that has reached sentience compared to a 5-year-old, even if there was a billion of them that reached sentience, I would still care about the 5-year-old just because I have my individual thoughts, and I think I could convince a panel of senators to put that into law as well. But it's complicated. I care more about the sentient.
But in that case, you said there is a calculation, right? Like if, are they on the
Sorry.
same
The calculation
spectrum?
would be that we could recognize that if we brought all 1 billion of those day one sentient fetuses, although technically it's an embryo still once it hits that mark. But anyways, the day one of sentience, if we brought all 1 billion of those to being born, then if we can do the calculation to recognize that our society can't take care of them, then I would recognize that we might have to do away with them. Would you
Like,
not?
well, yeah. I mean, I think those are externalities that don't need to enter into the hypothetical. Because, like, can I? I'm going to share my screen here,
Or better yet, would
and
you save that million sentient humans before the 5-year-old?
million centi. Yeah, I mean that's a calculation, but I consider them on the same in the same category where the calculation does apply. Like I'm gonna just try to illustrate. I've never drawn this before, but so I'm hopefully I can do this in a way that makes sense. But like if the red line is mapping the value of embryos, okay,
Mm-hmm.
non-sentient embryos. So I'll do something like this where it's like value and like number of or something.
Okay.
Um, so red line is like embryos, and the blue line is children. It's like, in my view, or what I'm trying to ask you is like, is there like a line where any amount of embryos, like it will never reach the value of of one child or something?
Um,
So like this just
yeah,
extends. Yeah.
let me know if maybe I am wording this poorly, and I can probably fix it up a bit. But I think the value can only depend on the capability of the society, of the individuals that are going to be participating in what we're referring to, participating in being able to care or to take care of in any way the child.
I have the axes backwards here. What I'm trying to say is like it reaches a maximum value of like, one or something. And this is the number. So it's like as many embryos as you do, it reaches like this asymptote where it never reaches the value of like one child, one like
Yeah.
sentient child.
As the numbers go up on the day one sentient embryos, um, I would say as the numbers go up, I
Oops.
care less about them.
As the numbers go up in which one? You care
Uh,
less about
it,
them.
in 1 day old sentient embryos. Well, yeah, just because I recognize. Well, let's see
Yeah.
if this clears anything up. And I agree with you that we can look at something being immoral without looking at the how practical it is. But if I was on an island and there was 100 babies that were all 6 months old, and I had and let's say I could magically know that I could only keep 15 of them alive with the amount of food that I'd have before we'd get saved. That the rest would suffer. And I had like a magic pill that I could give 85 of the 100 babies that would make them die instantly. I think the most moral thing to do would be to give the 85 the magic pill to make them die instantly, because I know what I'm capable of doing, and I'd have to pick at random. I probably wouldn't pick the cutest ones. I would I would just pick at random, and then I would take care of those 15. And so in this case, I care about, most importantly, I care about an individual from a species that can reach sentience. But I stop caring, or I care so much that I wouldn't keep something alive that we couldn't take care of.
Yeah. The second part of that, like, I think that's fine we can talk about that as a separate point, but like, which of these two charts that resonates more with you, like A or
Okay.
B? Is there some point at which the embryo value would ever surpass the value of like one, like, let's say this is like one sentient child or something? Yeah, I as I kept like changing this up, I realized this is the way to do it. So there's a
Yeah.
line. This is like one sentient child. This is the amount of value that it has. And so in graph A, the value of embryos, as many as you have, like they're in a separate category. They could never amount to the value of one sentient child. They reach like a limit. Whereas in the second one, it's like, yeah, some infinite number of non-sentient things, I would eventually value them above a sentient child.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how to view it, with the without adding the ability to take care of them. So, so for example, let's see how you view that these graphs work. If we had a situation where you had 10 embryos that reached day one of sentience versus one.
Can I stop you before? Because
Yeah.
I don't see why you need to, like, because all you're talking about is like, veganism is a philosophy that extends moral consideration to non-human animals. So we're just talking about like, which non-human animals should we extend moral consideration to?
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm saying like sentient ones.
Sorry,
and you're saying ones that are of a species that, yeah.
I feel like, and it's my fault, but we kind of branched off into like human abortion, or at least I felt like we were in human abortion.
I was giving a reductio that maybe led down that path, but yeah.
Well, the reason it's different is because, so in the wild, I can be well aware of, especially because I just watched a documentary on it, that only 5% of cheetahs make it to adulthood. And with turtles, I think it's 1%, and so on and so forth. I think with veganism, we shouldn't do anything to prevent even more animals from living as long as they might live. But whatever happens is going to happen in the wild. I don't think we necessarily should do any actions to care more about one than another, or to keep one alive more than the other. We just shouldn't prevent them from living. So non-sentient.
Yeah, all of that is just questions about like, how do you act on the fact that you value those things? And so
if there were wolf pups, I'm calling them pups, but they're embryos that have not, or zygotes that have not reached sentience in the water, I don't think we should actively end their lives. I view that the same as any other one, but in the same sense that I would need to know elements of what affects them to know if I care more about one than another. If an animal is more capable than another animal of suffering, then I care about the suffering of that one animal more. So if it hasn't reached sentience and I had to pick to do an action to that zygote versus the action of a wolf child that has been born and is sentient, then I would make that decision based on the harm. If I was capable of knowing which animals had
you can use killing then just as the example, like the rights violation of killing. And so it's like, if you want to extend, assuming that they would have lived a life average of that they would likely live or something, and it's like, so yeah, I'm just trying to say, like, is the amount of moral value you assign to the non-sentient thing, does it ever surpass even one sentient one.
I see. Um, I'm trying to imagine if I can. So since I think we should not harm any, if essentially
This
the
could be
question
like
becomes
one sentient wolf.
if at gunpoint I had to choose to harm 50 non-sentient wolves versus one sentient wolf, um, w- would that change in my mind? Yeah, I guess considering that I would base it on, I base almost everything I base on, first on suffering, second on uh, uh, um, a guess of a lack of a will for the future, and then third just on wanting to let something exist even outside of those two. I would have to focus on those other two things and say there's no amount of non-sentient wolves that I would
Okay.
protect over one sentient one, but I still don't think we should
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So bringing this back to your moral system, that was all to clarify that you almost need like an implied or written out separation then between, like, if you're defining, maybe you don't need it. Seeks to extend moral consideration to non-human animals. So you value embryos, but categorically never as much as a sentient being. So there's like,
Mhm.
it's, yeah, okay. I personally see no reason to value those embryos. But maybe we can move on to other parts of the thing, and just you can think about that part of it. But like,
Mhm. Well,
yeah,
let's look at real quick. Let's look at day one. So the second the embryo reaches day one of sentience, so that we can detect some cognitive ability. We can know that at that point, if you poke it with a tack, it'll like flinch
mm-hmm.
a little bit. That being snuffed out of life, like something tells you that like if it died quickly, no pain, whatever, that versus the day before, where it can't feel those things and it's snuffed out of life. Both of those cases, this animal that was its own complete thing it could have gone off and had a natural attempt at survival if both cases were left alone. But in both cases, they were snuffed out. To what level do you view that day one of sentience as like something wildly different happened?
Yeah, well, I assigned no moral value before that and some moral value after that. And so it's like, yeah, I would value more sentient things more. But I would assign some moral value to that, and with it, like some like negative rights that I would want to protect of it, like not being killed and not being hurt and things like that. Whereas I wouldn't grant those negative rights protections to the day before, pre-sentient
Hmm.
embryo.
That's interesting. Yeah, and at some point I want to try to break that down. Well, let me ask one more question just so I can know, but then I think it might be worth saving that for a
Sure,
different
yeah.
talk. Um, but if okay, so let's say you had 1 trillion of those, and we don't have to worry about how much land there is for things to live and survive. But you had 1 trillion of those one day sentient embryos versus a wolf that's like a year old, you know.
Mm.
Um, and you had to save the trillion or the
Yeah,
one. Like,
yeah. I don't know. This would be just one of those calculations. They would be like in my thing. It would be graph B. There would be some point at which the threshold would cross. There'd be enough of them that I would value them more. A trillion, I
interesting.
probably would meet that threshold. I think.
What if it
I'd
was
have to think about it,
humans?
but
What if
same thing.
so you have the 10 weeks into pregnancy. Let's
Yeah.
ignore the fact that like a
A
woman might have
trillion
to have
probably
risk.
wouldn't be
So
enough, but there would be some
okay,
point. Universes worth of like
these things that could just quickly be
infinitely
snuffed out
tortured.
and never. Okay,
Oh,
interesting.
just killing, quickly snuffing out.
Well,
Yeah. I
versus
think there would be
taking how old are you?
37.
Okay. Oh, we're both 37. That's crazy. Um, I thought you were like super young for some reason. Like not
I
like
get that a
super
lot. Yeah.
young. Um, I felt like you had been around long enough to learn all the things you know, and that also you were like 24, 25. But anyways, so let's say a 37-year-old that has a whole bunch of plans. So they love pickleball, they all these different things, and and you could wipe out all these day one
Yeah.
sentient trillions of whatever that have basically had no thoughts of the future. They've never
Yeah.
felt pain. They will not feel pain to be wiped out. It's weird because I defend those in general in a natural sense of I like the idea of anything once it's become an animal, its own animal to get its chance at life and to have protections in a good society. But I still would wipe out a trillion of those before I'd wipe out a
Yeah.
37-year-old.
Yeah. I probably would too. But I'm just saying they're in the same category. There would be some
Yeah.
threshold where I would if it was like maybe you know 10x that, or I don't know, a trillion times a trillion, whatever that number is, maybe that would be enough. I don't know. There would be some threshold where I would maybe even give my life for it. Like